Yeah, we just shared this poll asking folks one question in particular, are you going to start an A-Corp? And we have 67% of you saying you need more info. So you've come to the right place. Hopefully today we will be able to answer a lot of your questions. And I'm also looking forward to hearing the sorts of things you're looking to learn about and what you need in your own practice. So I'm going to talk a bit about where this came from, the context that we're in, what exactly it does, and what the next steps are. And then we'll have time for Q&A. I think my opening talk will probably be about 30 minutes going through it, but it's going to go pretty fast. So, and if you want to chat in the comments as I'm going, like I don't find that rude at all. I enjoy that, and you can drop questions we come to later, whatever you want to do. All right, so appreciate it. Um, so first, I just want to say that an A-Corp, we're going to do this definition several times, but an A-Corp is a new type of company that is designed to protect creative people and creative work by default. This is the underlying idea of what it is that we've made. And this is important, especially because the job and task of what it is to be a creative person is very different than it used to be. In these old days, hallowed old days, which were gate kept, very exclusive, tended to be discriminatory towards lots of people and groups, there's this world where you were protected within the confines of the institution, and your job was just to produce the work. That world is long gone. And today we find ourselves as creative people being entrepreneurs, being promoters, being a million different jobs that we're all having to do at the same time, even while most of what we're doing isn't really recognized as work. And it often starts from us from a place of passion and love and things that we don't want to feel like work. And this tension is a place that a lot of us are currently living in. And we're living in it, especially in more exaggerated time, in more exaggerated ways, because there are just so many more people creating and making work than ever. There was a poll that was done by United States of Artists a few years ago that found that 48% of Americans have an active creative practice. 48% of Americans, that's as many people as follow the NFL. So this is like a very mainstream thing that is just growing, that is proliferating in ways that are very challenging through AI, and that ultimately really prioritizes the creative work, but not really the person who is making it. And the people making it and the fact that we are creating value with what we do just doesn't fit that well in the existing system. We often are funded more as charitable enterprises, or we're self-funding versus real capitalists looking at us and looking at our work as something worth investing in for their own reasons. And the outcome of this gap has a different shape depending on what you're in, whether you're working in more of a nonprofit, non-commercial world, whether you're operating as an individual and you lack the sorts of collective benefits that others have, or you're in a group but maybe have some lack of clarity about how parts of ownership work, or you're a part of a much larger system in which you have very limited say. And so the belief behind this project is that all of these share a similar structural challenge that is addressable. It's not something that is a quick fix. It doesn't magically create a new money tree. It doesn't solve everything we might want to solve to start. But we can make a easier, better template. We can build a platform for more collective rights and benefits. And there's a lot of just shared outcomes that benefit all of us when we start to adopt the same system. And this is what the Artist Corporation is meant to do. But before getting into what exactly an A-Corp is, just a little bit about who I am. So my name is Yancey Strickler. I grew up on a farm in a small town in Southwest Virginia. My father was a musician, a country musician, and a salesman. My mom was a secretary. And so I grew up in a creative household and was always used to a creative life. It wasn't something anybody made money from, but it was just a part of how we lived. My initial career was as a music journalist, culture journalist, writing for places like Pitchfork and The Village Voice. I also started a tiny record label putting out music from artists that I loved. And it was around then that I co-founded, along with Perry Chen and Charles Adler, Kickstarter, and introduced the idea of crowdfunding, of a new way for people to fund projects, skipping gatekeepers and going directly to the public. And while I was CEO of Kickstarter, we became one of the first public benefit corporations, or a B Corp. And this was a new legal structure that was created in the late 2000s, early 2010s by a group of lawyers who wanted to create a new type of entity structure that protected businesses that weren't just optimizing for profit. And the existing system, those people didn't have explicit protection, so they wanted to create this path to do that. And so we became one of these first ones. And I happen to follow how that process happened very closely, which just planted a seed for later, as you can now see. And I stepped away from Kickstarter in 2017 and started working on a series of projects that have all been really based around making it as easy to cooperate as it is to compete. Writing books, exploring economics and the internet, and also making projects like MetaLabel, DFOS, the Creative Independent, and artist corporations. And artist corporations came from connecting some of these past dots together. While making this Dark Forest anthology of the internet book, a group of writers, we were making a lot of money, 6 figures of money selling a book together, but without any legal representation. I started going down the path of creating an LLC for us, immediately became depressed at how hard it was, that I was going to pay some lawyer, that it just wasn't straightforward. And I thought back to the experience of seeing how PBCs were made. And I thought, oh, the same process of creating a new type of business entity that would allow for money to flow in new ways, I wonder if we can do the same thing for creative people. So that work started a little over 2 years ago. And one of the first steps was just talking to people. I've had a lot of experience just through friends, sort of accumulating things that are difficult and challenging. But we started to meet with people in person, as well as we did an online survey where we invited people to weigh in on what it is they wanted. And we heard from folks across the different mediums and types. And we learned that about half of the people are working as individuals, and about half were in some sort of collective project, and about 30 to 40% had no structure at all legally. So they were just operating as individuals. We learned that the overwhelming majority, 75%, were self-financed, and that most people made less than 20, or not, 40% of people, plurality of people, made less than $20,000 or maybe nothing from their work. But we also heard from them the biggest pain points, the things that were hard. The number one was to raise money, getting access to healthcare, the admin burden, just the challenges of running it, how you protect ownership, distribute it. And we also heard what people were most interested in, something that was cheap to set up, something that allowed ownership of IP to be cleaner, easier to start, could attract money. And so we began trying to design a structure that met these needs and fulfilled a lot of the goals that we had heard from others. And basically what we ended up creating with the help of several lawyers and a lot of interviews was taking what are some of the best practices that exist, say, among entertainment lawyers advising clients, as well as the things we heard, to try to design a new starting template for how an artist or a creator would incorporate and get started operating their business. To do this, we used an LLC. This work is focused in Colorado to start. We'll get to that in a second. But it's an LLC, so it is a type of a limited liability company. So existing LLC law applies underneath, but that we've created a template on top of. And that template introduces a few specific rules. First, it says that to qualify as an A-Corp, it must be 51% minimum owned by artists and creators. This is something that is self-attested when you create an A-Corp. We can get into how artist and creator are defined later. But we wanted to set a line to say, how is it that Spotify wouldn't qualify as an A-Corp or something like this? What is the principle we're upholding? And we think the principle that we're upholding is artist and creator ownership and control. So that's a hard line that's baked in. Next, you are explicitly asked when creating an A-Corp, what is the creative, cultural, or artistic mission of this project? And that then has legal protection. The A-Corp statute also very easily allows for things like separation of governance rights, where, say, artist owners can only have a creative voice or voice in creative decisions. Maybe others can only have voices in other decisions. We also talked to a lot of IP experts about how we might devise a good out-of-the-box solution for an artist or creator starting a new entity. There were some limits on what we could do here because federal law tends to govern IP. But one thing we heard a lot about are reversionary rights, which is saying, hey, if this deal goes south, instead of my client's intellectual property, instead of their work sort of going down with the ship or being lost to some Byzantine corporate structure, that work reverts back to the artists. And this is something that for people with sway that they always build in. So we made that a part of the structure. And in creating the process of building your A-Corp, the website we've made for it, there's a very clear step of assigning what intellectual property should belong to the A. And that is just a very explicit process that also allows and asks for that work to be valued as a capital asset. So there is a world in which, say, work you say belongs to your artist corporation. If that work has a material value that can be determined, we can get into that later, that should count as the value of the overall entity and should be used when, say, valuing it for an investor or maybe taking a loan, things like that. Also in the process of creating an artist corporation, there is a checkbox step where you just say if you want to have fractional ownership or not. Should this be distributed among multiple parties? Should it happen democratically? Do we assign specific percentages? But do you want to create shares? And this is just trying to make it very easy for collaborative projects to be distributed, ownership distributed, more like how startups are, or even to be able to use ownership as a form of equity to compensate people. This also makes it easier to sell equity to investors. If you're selling to friends and family, people within network, this is something that's quite easy to do. If you're looking to do a public offering, equity crowdfunding, those sorts of things, that stuff, there are still SEC regulations around, steps you have to go through. We'll get to those a little bit later down the line. Now, fifth, something that can happen but is not made possible immediately by the law is that this creates the potential for group plans with health insurance companies for artist corporations and their members. These are conversations we're beginning to have, but basically saying to a health insurance company, hey, artist corporations, creative people, as both individuals and in these member groups, this is an important constituency that's historically been less likely to have health insurance. We'd love to create a group plan that gives them good rates, that treats them as an important customer base that you want to develop. And so we think we have a chance to have some good traction with that. That doesn't explicitly happen from the law, but what it does is by having more of us crowd into the same structure, using the same structure, we can have that market power of saying, look, there's all these people here who are customers. Why don't you serve them? This is the difference between being a rounding error in a much larger system versus having a system of our own. So the way I would sort of frame this is say that the A-Corp creates an accessible foundation and template that supports creative work and people by default. A-Corps do not make it possible to do something you literally could not do before, not to start. That could happen in the future. There's ways that we could see that could occur, but just out of the gate, this doesn't create magical new abilities. This doesn't let us skip other steps. This just creates a new template that is pre-built for what we believe it best serves the needs of creative people. And so for the last year plus, our attention has been on Colorado as the first place where this law could be created and passed. In the United States, new corporate structures are created at the state level. So you go state by state to make these. And we just had people independently from Colorado just reach out in a way that felt like the universe was asking for it. And Colorado also allows people to register businesses from anywhere. And so we just sort of went with the universe and met a great community, amazing community of folks who became partners on this. And we ended up passing a bipartisan law, got signed early this June. And literally today, the law is officially enacted. It doesn't mean you can do anything yet. The Secretary of State's office still has to make some databases and things, but the law is literally live today. And early next year, we will be able to start the very first A-Corps in Colorado. We don't have an exact date yet, but we're going to know more soon. What we found in building the case in Colorado was that it really was a bipartisan support. We heard from people arguing about how the arts increased local property values. And people were excited to do something that was in support of the creative community, really from politicians across the aisle. There was a strong belief that creative people are valuable to their communities. They want more of them. They want to protect them. They want to give them housing. Like we thought we were going to have to convince people to care. They were already there. They were with us. And so the bill was signed and very soon will become actually available for the first A-Corps to begin. So at artistcorporations.com, there is a process, a pre-register process, which is a preview of what the A-Corp bill is actually like. Now, we made this by taking existing LLC operating agreement templates, running the A-Corp laws that existed over it, creating a structure that matched these things together. We're working on a more final version now. But some of the things you see as you go through this process, you're asked to define your artistic mission. You can choose from a drop-down. Does art come first when making decisions, or is it about art and money together? And that will change how your operating agreement is written. You define who the founding members of the A-Corp are, what percentage of ownership they have. In the future, we want this to also be able to issue something like an ownership certificate that someone can be able to hold and easily see in a profile online. You can also here choose if you want to create fractional equity or ownership. Again, this just changes how your operating agreement is written. And there's a very basic process for how it is you contribute existing creative work or protect certain work from being a part of the A-Corp. This is something we just heard over and over that right now is murky and people are anxious about, especially in the age of AI. So this allows you to very explicitly declare what should and should not exist within. All right, we're going to have a bunch of questions about everything I just said. We're going to get to in a moment. A little bit more about who we are. So we created this project originally came out of MetaLabel, a studio that makes projects that help creative people cooperate rather than compete. We have since created the Artist Corporations Foundation, which is a nonprofit that champions creative value and rights. The A-Corp is our primary project, but it aims to lead a larger movement and be very collaborative with lots of other entities and institutions. I'm currently right now leading it, but we have with us Susan McCormick, who's the lawyer who helped write the A-Corp bill, as well as board members Jennifer Arsenault, whose background at Sundance and lots of amazing places, and Mikhail Moore, who works with Wonderland and Janelle Monáe. And Lena, who's here on the call with me, who's also an artist and accountant and brings a lot of expertise to this. And the way we're thinking about this is that there's three big things we're doing. We're working on policy and tools to make those policies real. You see this exactly with the A-Corp law. And on the back end of that, because we ourselves are technologists, people, we are also building the tools to make these things practically usable. So making dashboards, making shared treasuries, tools that will make this more accessible. We're also doing a lot around education. There's a lot we're going to have to learn, and people have to learn as we're setting up the first A-Corps. This is something we're going to be very involved in, and we will, for the very first A-Corps getting started in 2027, we're going to have a cohort. We're going to have more, we'll share applications, or it's not applications, just to join that. We'll begin hopefully next week. But bringing the people together who are going through this process for the first time so we can all learn and just be in conversation with each other. And, and really, I think a lot of what the A-Corp project has been to date has been about storytelling. In many ways, what we're doing, we're taking what is a redesigned LLC, a fairly basic legal structure. We're giving it a name, we're giving it a story, we're expressing what it is it's trying to solve and for whom. And in many ways, those changes are quite subtle, but in other ways, it's led to a huge surge of interest. It's led to political forces embracing the causes of artists, and it's leading to really the possibility of a very different foundation and infrastructure for us. And so we think there's a lot farther for that to go. We're really running a lot of the community out of this DFOS we've made. This is another project we made, Dark Forest Operating System. But this is this private world where we can talk with each other, where we're talking and making announcements, and we're increasingly, there's going to be organizing around these first cohorts. And so this, if you want to be most up to date on what's going on, this is the place to be, acorp.dfos.com. And so what's an A-Corp? It is a new company form that protects creative people and work by default. An A-Corp is a new company form that protects creative people and work by default. And so where we are now, the first A-Corps will be live in Colorado early in the new year. And we are currently working with a number of other states who will be launching laws soon. California is one of them. Several other very large states are as well. So this is going to be spreading across the US. We've had people in other nations also reach out. We're less familiar what the process is for making new laws there is, but there will be sort of a template and model that others can take and help bring the A-Corp to them. Our aim is to create the first group plans for artists and A-Corps within the next couple of years. And ultimately, we want to bring new sources of funding, investors, people who are excited to support creative practices because they believe in them, because they think they're important, because they think they can be good business, and because there really is a bounty that we are together creating. Ultimately, we are still at the early stages and at the middle of what I think is a much larger movement where across the 21st century, it is really creative and cultural perspectives that are remaking so much of the world. Us as people who tell stories, who make things, who design things, who shape experiences, we have really become incredibly influential in how all of us experience the world. And as we move towards more of a machine life, the sorts of expressions and abilities and skills that we have, I think only increase in value, they don't decrease. And so this is why we need these sorts of systems that take us seriously and that are thinking about us not just as like an extra thing or something you get for free or the thing you try to pay the least for, but actually think about our work as a true source of value and something worth protecting.